When women succeed, the world succeeds. Speaker Pelosi's words there, I think, are an inspiring introduction into this next part of our Gender Day discussions. It is my great pleasure to be chairing this panel. There is no doubt we must ensure that climate change is a feminist issue. We must make sure that the experiences of women and girls across the world, so often disproportionately impacted by climate change, are understood as we devise the solutions. And we must make sure that the voices of women are at the centre of creating and implementing the solutions to climate change. Climate change is a feminist issue. We must make sure that the experiences of women and girls across the world, so often disproportionately impacted by climate change, are understood as we devise the solutions. And we must make sure that the voices of women are at the centre of creating and implementing the solutions to climate change. A country like Scotland, with a rich industrial past, has a special responsibility. We have disproportionately contributed to climate change, so we must do more now to help tackle climate change. So, final point, where our voice and our contribution matters. So often it's states or devolved nations like Scotland that have to respond most directly to the impacts of climate change. Heat waves, floods, hurricanes, we have to deal with the implication. Now for Scotland, California, New South Wales, that's difficult but manageable. For many others across the world, it is not. So climate justice matters too. It's not enough to cut our own emissions, although that is vital. We have to make sure we are helping those who have done the least to cause climate change to do so too. And with the spirit of justice and fairness absolutely at the heart of that. Very directly, but firstly, thank you so much for the power of your presentations and the clarity and the urgency of the demands that you have made. I don't sit directly around the negotiating table here, but I promise you I will do everything I can to amplify your voice and make sure that these demands are heard and, I hope, delivered, because I didn't hear a single thing today that I in any way disagreed with. You said earlier on that you still trust people like us. I think that's really generous of you, because frankly, people of our generation have not yet done enough to earn that trust, and I hope that starts to change over the course of COP26. When I watched the video earlier on, I thought the most powerful thing in it was the ticking of the clock at the end of it, because this is make or break. Time is running out, and it's your lives and it's your futures that are at stake here. So we must step up and we must deliver for you, because failure to do that, frankly, is not an option. What am I going to do? I want to talk about, very briefly, 3 things that I commit to you to do. Firstly, to lead by example here at home in my own country, which I have the privilege of being First Minister of. Scotland has already set the targets that are consistent with the Paris goals. That's good, but that is not enough. Targets that are not delivered are meaningless. So our responsibility now is to meet those targets. So I promise you we will accelerate as far and as fast as we can that transition away from fossil fuels. In Scotland's case, that is oil and gas, and prioritise investment in clean, green, renewable energy. For those of you who are visiting Glasgow for the first time, you'll have noticed we have quite a lot of wind and water. There's no excuse. We have an abundance of renewable energy potential. We must make sure that we fully utilise that. So the Scottish Government has helped to support COP16 here, and I want to commit today to working with our Scottish Youth Parliament here. I can't imagine any of them ever allowing me to write their speech, incidentally, but we have a vibrant youth voice in Scotland. I want to work with them to establish here a Scottish COI approach so that we can embed the voice of youth in everything that we do. So I'll stop there, but thank you so much for being the conscience of this summit. Keep raising your voices and keep putting pressure on people like us to make sure that your voice is heard. It all starts with education. We have what's called a curriculum for excellence in Scotland. That's our school curriculum, and in summary, that is intended, before we get to the knowledge it's giving young people, it's intended to educate young people to be responsible citizens, to understand the world around them so that they can then influence that world. I think we've got more to do in Scotland to have a properly integrated approach to climate so that young people understand all of the connections between climate change and gender policy and inequality. So we're still working to improve that, to embed climate education into everything that young people are learning, because that, again, just showing the power of education is key to then empowering them to make the change that is needed. Countries like mine, countries we're standing here in the city that helped propel the world into the industrial age, countries like mine that have benefited so much from climate change, that have done so much to cause climate change, unless we step up and pay our debt to developing countries now living with the impact, we will fail, and that failure will shame all of us. That may...
Just right to my camera, please.
So the next is that you would like to see the master just to sit down. Okay. Thanks.
Young people who care enough about the future of the planet to come out to make their voices heard. I know I passed it on the way here, it looks like a sizable demonstration, and it's young people that are powering this agenda. I was reflecting to myself that it only feels like 5 minutes in my life from the day that I would have been on that march, rather than being a leader that is charged with living up to the expectations of young people.
Presiding officer, and it's a privilege to lead a discussion about the role Scotland can play in the world to champion progressive democratic values. The COVID crisis has reminded us as never before of our interdependent world. Last year, the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier said that the pandemic was a test of our common humanity. And as we emerge from the public health crisis, there are further tests ahead that will shape the world around us and for future generations. The Scottish Government is determined to play our part and to make our contribution. That starts with an internationalist outlook based on cooperation and not confrontation. We have the opportunity to build on strong foundations as a nation. We are active and connected with a long history of constructive engagement with our neighbours. We have a track record of leadership on climate change and climate justice. The Minister will say more about the opportunities presented by COP26 at the conclusion of this debate, and effective delivery of development assistance. And the United Nations Refugee Agency have suggested that the UK's Nationality and Borders Bill violates the 1951 Refugee Convention. The President of the Law Society for England and Wales has said, and I quote, "There are significant concerns and a lack of clarity over whether the bill would comply with international law or indeed uphold access to justice for extremely vulnerable people." And it's in this context that we will go the extra mile to ensure that the Scottish Government can continue to engage internationally for the benefit of Scotland's people, businesses and institutions. And that is why the programme for government sets out an ambitious agenda for Scotland's place in the world. Guiding our work will be an updated global affairs framework. The updated framework will articulate how our internationally focused programmes of work fit together and link back to the national performance framework. It will help us to keep our focus on being open, connected and making a positive contribution internationally, a key national outcome, and learn from each other in areas such as transition to net zero and in reducing inequalities. The new presence in Warsaw is likely to focus on people-to-people links, policy exchange, support for trade and investment and cultural cooperation across the Central European and Baltic regions. Members will know that we are very fortunate to have around 92,000 Poles choosing to call Scotland home, sustaining a vibrant and active Polish community all across the nation, and we highly value their contribution to our society. Membership of the EU is about much more than trade deals, and Scotland shares with the EU a vision for Europe that embodies democratic values, promoting the well-being of all in society, rises fully to the challenge of the global climate emergency, and supports a sustainable economic recovery from the global pandemic. We believe the pandemic and the response to it has demonstrated the need for more cooperation between independent nations, not less. And the election in May once again underlined the strong support from the people of Scotland for our view that rejoining the European Union at the earliest opportunity as an independent country represents the best future for Scotland. Forgive me, I have just 20 seconds to conclude. Until that point in time, we'll maintain alignment where possible with EU legislation, policy and standards. This helps ensure that Scotland is able to protect and advance the high standards we enjoyed as part of the EU, promote ease of market access for our people and businesses, and smooth the process of Scotland's re-accession. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, to choose a Scotland with the power to make decisions in areas like social security, taxation and immigration is to build a better country. A Scotland ready to be able to play our part in the global community of nations, championing progressive values and helping to build that better world we know is possible. I move the motion in my name.
Deputy Presiding Officer, many of us have for some considerable time given much thought to the role Scotland has played in championing progressive values, on climate action, on welcoming immigrants, on peace, and importantly, on how we can be better. While we have a long and proud tradition of leading change around the world and indeed creating progressive values, we must also understand the role Scotland has played in the worst episodes of imperialism, old and new, from slavery to hosting nuclear weapons. That is not to say that, as Scots, we are somehow unable to change or make recompense for these episodes, but we must recognise that they are not just issues of the past. The long shadow of slavery darkens the present day. The impact of our role in imperialism continues to drive division from Ireland to South Asia. We can, though, redeem these actions and become a global force for good. But before I speak more about how we can be a global force for good, I implore everyone here, indeed all Scots, to recognise the darker elements of our history, as well as those more fated moments. We see at Westminster the outcome of having a government that cannot see the historical impact of its actions. The UK government's abandonment of its commitment to international development funding is disgraceful, short-sighted and contemptible. We continue to make the case for restoring this. Whilst cutting aid may play well to British Empire chauvinists in the home counties, it is nothing short of a default on the UK's obligation to return some of the plunder of imperialism to those we stole from. I want Scotland to do better. I want Scotland to live up to all of our aspirations as a global builder of peace and justice, to be a champion for enhancing the rights of those at home, whilst at the same time recognising those same rights apply to all individuals and communities across the globe.